Hello everyone, Pastor Howie with a continuation of our readings and thoughts from the scriptures. As we continue in particular in the book of Acts, we come to a new chapter in this video, chapter 18. We're still following the second missionary journey of the Apostle Paul. His associates Silas and Timothy, and from time to time Luke, the author of the book of Acts, are with him. And he's been going around visiting cities that he went to in his first missionary journey, and then passing from Asia Minor into Europe, in particular the area called Achaia in Greece. We know it as Greece today. He establishes churches there as well. So we've seen him establish a church at Thessalonica, and which caused the unbelieving Jews who resisted the gospel to basically chase him out of town. But the church remained, and there are two letters in our New Testament that were written to that church, that gathering of people in Thessalonica. From there he went to Berea, where the people were more honorable, the Jews in the synagogues more honorable, and searched the scriptures. Many people believed there, but once again, Jews from Thessalonica stirred things up, and Paul had to move on. He went to Philippi, where he ended up being arrested, but at the same time, he ended up meeting a woman named Lydia at a place of prayer who invited him, after she came to believe and be baptized, she invited him and his associates to stay at her house. And ultimately, that house probably became the planting of the church in Philippi. And there's a letter in the New Testament written to the Philippians. So that church thrived. As a matter of fact, the letter to Philippians indicates it became a strong church. And now, after Philippi, or after leaving that city, he went to Athens. We see no evidence that he planted a church there, but he planted some seeds amongst the philosophers and debaters on the Areopagus on Mars Hill. But then he departed from there, and he ends up here in chapter 18, verses 1 through 17 in Corinth, another church that he establishes. And he spent some time in Corinth, as we'll see. And he met some people that we read about in other places in the New Testament who became leaders of the church in Corinth. And so, again, we also find that he started out in the synagogues, but he comes to a decision in Corinth that changes the direction of his ministry predominantly for the rest of his life. And that is, he stops trying to share the gospel as a priority in his life with the Jews in Jewish synagogues. He just preaches the gospel in church, in places where churches get planted here and there throughout the rest of his career. So we have two letters. Two of the New Testament letters are to the Thessalonians. Two of the two New Testament letters are to the Corinthians. One letter is to the Philippians. We have a letter from Paul to the Ephesians, and we've already read in his first missionary journey about his visit to Ephesus, and we'll see more about that here as well. So let's read along Acts 18, verses 1 through 17. In Corinth. After this, after Paul's visit in Athens and the things that happened there, after this, Paul left Athens and went to Corinth. There he met a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, who had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius, who was the emperor at the time, had ordered all Jews to leave Rome. So he was purging the city of Rome from the Jewish population. Paul went to see them, and because he was a tent maker, as they were, he stayed and worked with them. Every Sabbath he reasoned in the synagogue, trying to persuade Jews and Greeks, Hellenistic Jews, who were attenders at synagogue. When Silas and Timothy came from Macedonia, Paul devoted himself exclusively to preaching. So he quit working part-time, if you will, with Priscilla and Aquila, and now he is able, with Timothy and Silas there to support him and help him, he's devoting himself exclusively to preaching, testifying to the Jews that Jesus was the Messiah. And that phrase has shown up in a couple other places where Paul is in the synagogues testifying from the scriptures, or testifying to the congregation there that Jesus is the Messiah. He's preaching the gospel. But when they opposed Paul, that is the synagogue rulers, when they opposed Paul and became abusive, he shook out his clothes in protest. Like what Jesus said to his disciples, if a city doesn't receive you, kick off the dust from your sandals and leave that city. So Paul is shaking out his clothes in protest and said to them, your blood be on your own heads. In other words, you're accountable for this. I am innocent of it. From now on, I will go to the Gentiles, to the nations. So Paul is basically expressing the idea that all of this resistance, which is truly motivated by the spirit of Antichrist, but all of this resistance to the preaching of the gospel by the people that Jesus came to, the Jews, the people of God, all of this resistance is enough to convince Paul the Gentiles are receptive. I'm going to the Gentiles. Whatever happens to you, unbelieving Jews, is on your own head. So, verse 7 tells us, then Paul left the synagogue and went next door to the house of Titius Justus. Don't know if he knew Titius Justus or not ahead of time. We kind of assume he is a believer because Luke describes him as a worshiper of God. He may have been, because the name seems very Roman. Probably was a Gentile. So he went to a Gentile's house, and this Gentile, like the Caesarean, the leader of the band in Acts chapter 10 that Paul went to, Cornelius, was a worshiper of God and a Gentile. So I think that's probably the case with this Titius Justus. Anyway, Crispus, the synagogue leader, and his entire household believed in the Lord. And many of the Corinthians who heard Paul believed and were baptized. It's likely, can't guarantee it here, but that Titius Justus ended up like Lydia in Philippi, hosting what became the Corinthian church. So, Corinthians believed, they heard Paul, they were baptized, but as the story goes on, verse 9, one night the Lord spoke to Paul in a vision. Do not be afraid. He'd received opposition, he'd been beaten, he'd been chased out of places. Do not be afraid. Keep on speaking. Do not be silent. Just keep at it, Paul. For I am with you, and no one is going to attack and harm you, because I have many people in this city. So Paul was there to discover the people of God in the city of Corinth, so to speak. So Paul stayed in Corinth for 1.5 years, a specific time. So we know he would travel from place to place to place, but in Corinth he stayed for a while. In Ephesus he stayed for a while. And it's significant because his itinerary was interrupted by a time of pastoral ministry as an apostle in churches that he started. Anyway, he was there for a year and a half, teaching them the Word of God. We come next to another event in Paul's stay in Corinth. Verse 12. While Gallio, who is a Roman, was proconsul of Achaia, similar to Pilate being proconsul of Judea. While Gallio was proconsul of Achaia, the Jews of Corinth made a united attack on Paul and brought him to the place of judgment. That's happened before. We've seen that happen. They turn to the civil authorities, whether it's a local authority or whether it's a Roman authority, and they try to stop Paul. They try to influence the secular authorities, the governing authorities, that this guy's a troublemaker and we need to stop him. Those who oppose the gospel do this still to this day. They try to create and try to indict those who spread the gospel as troublemakers, seditious elements, whatever, that are going to destroy their country or interrupt their country or cause a rebellion in their country. And so they try to get them stopped. In some extents, in some places, there's evidence of that happening even in our own country. Fortunately, it's not an overwhelming success, but we are seeing opposition. And we always will. Jesus told us that, told his disciples, you will face persecution. You will face tribulation as faithful followers of me. So the message to Paul, do not be afraid, is a message for us. Keep on speaking. Don't be silent. God is with us, and no one is going to attack and harm you. And even if they do attack and harm you, the worst thing they can do is kill you, and then you're absent from the body and present with the Lord. So the victory is won by death of Jesus on the cross, and the victory is won for us. Even death can't stop us from living eternal lives with Christ, who we follow, if we follow him. Anyway, this man they charged is persuading the people to worship God in ways contrary to the law. So, just as Paul, verse 14, was about to speak, Gallio said to them, to the Jews, if you Jews were making a complaint about some misdemeanor or serious crimes, it would be reasonable for me to listen to you. But since it involves questions about words and names and your own law, settle the matter yourselves. So Gallio had no interest in the Jews and their indictment of Paul because of what he preached. So he goes on and says, settle the matter yourselves. I will not be a judge of such things. So he drove them off. Then the crowd, all stirred up. Now it's mob mentality again, showing its ugly face in the history of the spread of the gospel. Then the crowd there turned on Sosthenes, the synagogue leader, apparently blaming him for letting Paul do what he's doing, turned on Sosthenes, the synagogue leader, and beat him in front of the proconsul, and Gallio showed no concern whatever. You want to beat yourselves up? Beat yourselves up. I don't care. I'm not involved. And we see the hand of God in this, preventing Paul from being stopped, even by a disinterested Roman official who had more things on his mind than these complaints about religious things in his city. So that's what we have thus far, Paul in Corinth. Until the next time, take to heart what God said to Paul and make it a message that you receive in your own hearts. Do not be afraid. Keep on speaking. Do not be silent. For I am with you, And no one is going to attack and harm you because I have many people in this city. And as we share with people and have developed relationships with people, that's the way, as they see the light of the gospel in us, that's the way that light illuminates the emptiness in their hearts, and they come to be the people of God as we share the words unafraid. Till next time, God bless you.